Coppicing, BYU grounds. In this training, we're going to coppice a shrub. But first, we'll start by looking at why we coppice, when it's appropriate, how the process works, and then we'll walk through some practical step-by-step examples. So what is coppicing? Coppicing is a pruning technique used to reduce plant stems to ground level or just a few inches above ground level. This hard pruning then stimulates the plant to produce a flush of new shoots from the base of the plant or from latent buds near the ground. So why coppice? Coppicing can be used to remove older wood, control the size of a plant, restore a plant's natural habit, stimulate new growth from the base of the plant, and enhance ornamental qualities such as colorful young stems or dramatic foliage. However, coppicing is only appropriate in certain situations. Before coppicing a plant, we need to take several factors into account, like species, vigor, how well established the plant is, timing, fruit and blossom goals, maintenance capacity, and dormancy precipitation. Species. Coppicing works best on species that reliably resprout from the base of the plant after hard pruning. Vigorous shrubs that respond well to coppicing include plants like forsythia, ninebark, butterfly bush, coralberry, purple-leaf winter creeper, spirea, viburnum, barberry, dogwood, Grollo sumac, Oregon grape, weigela, mock orange, and cotoneaster. In contrast, some shrubs like junipers don't have latent buds and generally do not recover well when pruned back into non-foliaged areas. And some shrubs like lilacs respond, but they respond by sending up suckers. Vigor. Vigor is critical for coppicing because coppice plants have to draw on stored energy to respond with strong regrowth. A vigorous plant is one that is not in obvious decline, is growing strongly with good leaf color, decent shoot growth, and minimal dieback. It should also show no clear signs of stress from drought, pests, diseases, or soil problems. In contrast, plants that are old, declining, or already stressed are poor candidates for coppicing because the additional shock of heavy cutting can push them past their ability to recover. Well established. Coppicing relies on a plant's ability to regenerate from a well-established root system. Transplanting can be stressful for plants, and that said, many sources advise waiting several growing seasons, often up to 3 years, until a plant has a good root system, has adapted to the site, and is growing vigorously before coppicing it for the first time. Timing. Timing is also critical for coppicing. Plant health depends heavily on energy reserves. During dormancy, much of this energy is held in the roots. As plants come out of dormancy, they draw on these reserves to push out new shoots and leaves. If a plant is coppiced after this surge of growth, instead of while the plant is fully dormant, you remove the very shoots the plant has just invested in, which can weaken overall growth and slow recovery. For deciduous plants, a practical rule of thumb is to wait until the plant is fully dormant, which is at least 2 weeks after leaf fall. Then coppice any time during winter dormancy, before buds begin to swell in early spring. Flower and bloom goals. Some plants produce their fruit and blossoms on old wood. Some plants produce their fruit and blossoms on new wood. And some plants produce their fruit and blossoms on a combination of both. And plants that rely mainly on old wood may produce few or no fruit or blooms for a year or two after a hard pruning. If fruit or blossom production is important to you, coppicing may not be the best strategy, or you might consider staggering your approach. Maintenance capacity. Maintenance capacity deals with whether or not a site can support this kind of hard reset. In other words, Can the area live with low-cut stems for a season? Is there space for light and regrowth? Or is the plant facing too much competition for resources with neighboring plants? Is there time for watering, weeding, and follow-up pruning? And can the surrounding design tolerate things like gaps in screens and foot traffic funnels? Dormancy precipitation. Many plants continue some level of activity during dormancy. They may not be growing actively above ground, but they still rely on stored resources and available moisture to stay healthy. That's why dormancy precipitation matters. If the winter is dry and the plant is already dealing with limited moisture, coppicing can add another layer of stress. In those cases, the combined stress of hard pruning and water deficit may be too much for some plants. So before coppicing, it's worth asking, how much precipitation is expected during dormancy? Is the soil already dry? And will the plant have enough moisture to recover well after this type of aggressive pruning? If dormancy precipitation is low, or if the soil is dry several inches down, it may be better to delay coppicing or reduce the severity of the cut. If adequate precipitation is expected, coppicing is generally safer. Not guaranteed safe, but safer. As a practical rule, delay or lighten coppicing if dormancy precipitation is mild or low, especially if the soil is dry at 6 to 12 inches deep, or if winter rainfall is below about 1 inch per month and there is no snow cover. Coppice more normally if the plant is getting roughly 1 inch or more of water equivalent per month, whether from rain or snow, and the soil remains moist. Lastly, how to coppice. Now that we've covered what coppicing is, some of its uses, when it's appropriate, and some of the factors to consider before getting started, let's walk through what the process might look like in practice. To demonstrate this technique, we've selected this Diablo 9 bark. At a glance, you'll notice that this particular 9 bark is in pretty decent shape. It's retained its natural habit, it's been decently well maintained over the years using natural target pruning, and we're not really seeing any dead, damaged, or diseased material. You'll notice that there are some adventitious roots that need to be removed, but again, this plant is in pretty decent shape. Probably the biggest issue this plant has is a rejuvenation/thinning issue. As you can see here, the plant has a number of older stems that haven't been thinned out in years. We've also got some concerns about blossom productivity. 9 bark blossoms on previous season's growth, so coppicing the entire plant would likely result in few to no blossoms this year. Well, that's plenty of information in the way of goals and special considerations to get us started. That said, to prune this plant, we're going to do a few things. We'll start by removing the older, thicker stems that are either unproductive or have no lateral branches originating near the base of the plant. Where possible, we'll make those cuts low enough to preserve some side branching on the remaining structure. If the side branching starts higher up, we can leave those stems a little taller, say 4 to 8 inches, or remove those stems completely. But in either case, we still want to keep the cut height consistent across the plant. We'll leave the younger stems mostly intact, pruning them lightly if at all, so we can preserve the vigorous new growth already in place and retain as much blossoming potential this season as possible. And if we use tools like hedge trimmers, we should consider touching up any cut, particularly any large diameter cut, that isn't smooth and clean. Now, for the sake of time, we're not going to show every individual cut. But at this point, all of the older, thicker stems that are either unproductive or have no lateral branches originating near the base of the plant have been pruned either back to the soil line or back to a basal lateral. What remains are the younger, more vigorous stems, which we left largely intact. This is the end of the coppicing segment of our training video. To review, you'll remember that when we first got started, we inherited a shrub that had been decently well maintained, there were some adventitious roots that needed to be removed, and it had some rejuvenation/thinning issues. To help mitigate these issues, we removed the adventitious roots, and we reduced or removed all of the older, thicker stems that were either unproductive or had no lateral branches originating from the base of the plant. We realized that pruning is a combination of art and science, and in many instances, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong way to prune as it pertains to how aggressively to prune and which specific stems to remove. But we hope that this training will give you a better idea of how we coppice shrubs at BYU.